This is Talk with BJH, and I'm Brandon J. Harris. Today, I want to talk about the N-words. This message is specifically for Black people. Don't get me wrong, if you are not Black, then you shouldn't be saying the word anyway. But this message is specifically for Black people. We're really getting out of hand with the N-word at this point, and it really frustrates me. I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time. So, listen, I don't understand who decided that this word belonged to us, or somehow that we've turned it around so it doesn't mean what it means. And at the end of the day, it just seems like we're the only people who don't know that it's a really bad word. And it's used so much in media and music and film, and it's just really disheartening to see it just so prevalent now that everyone uses it. But I don't think anybody really knows the context of the word and where it came from and the history of it. Obviously, a lot of people know about slavery, but do you really know the weight behind the word? The word holds centuries of weight to it. And it doesn't matter whether you're using ER, whether you're using the A on the end. It doesn't matter if you're talking to a friend or a family member. The word still means the same thing. So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that you just don't know. Right? And if you do know the history and you're still using the N-word, then shame on you, especially if you're talking to other Black people. Doesn't make sense to me, and I really just wanted to address it really, in this video really fast. Number one, like who was the person who's the person who represented all Black people to say that this was the word that we were gonna use for ourselves and make it cool? And I remember when Bill Maher came out and used the N-word in one of his skits, or one of his bits on his show. And the next week he had Ice Cube on the show, and apparently Ice Cube represented all Black people, saying that we've taken the word back. Well, no, we didn't take the word back. You can keep it. We don't want it. And I'll give you an example. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was telling me a story that he had invited some friends over to help him move during a move. Well, when one of his friends got there, he actually started going through his things, and we were on the phone, and he tells me, I don't mean to sound messed up or anything, but this is the reason why I don't let N-words over my house. And at that moment I said, all right, I'm glad you said that, because now I'd like to have a conversation with you because you use the N-word a lot. So can you agree that there is a subculture inside of Black subculture in American society that has a very negative characters that we associate with negativity, and we use the N-word? And he says, oh yeah, for sure. I was like, okay, because you've heard the argument that there's a difference between Black people and the N-word. Yet if you notice that there's always a double standard there, where certain people of other races can't say it, but we could say it to each other all day. And if we're being realistic, you can see that there is a caste system here in the United States where white is at the top and Black is at the bottom. But there's a small subculture in Black culture that we call the N-word, and everybody knows it. And it's an unspoken thing that everyone acts like that it's invisible, they don't see it. And the only time they see it is when it's a good thing and they're talking to their family members, or when it's a bad thing because maybe some white person said it to them, or maybe some white person was around a bunch of black people and thought it was okay, so he or she said it, and then they get mad at them. So let's just be real about it, that nobody should be saying this word. And to make the argument, you got to think about the context of the word and the history of it. And I stopped saying the N word a long time ago because I used to say it, and I had to learn. So I went once. I took an American history class, and it was 2 courses, and we studied out this really thick book. It was called A People and a Nation. It's a textbook, and I would implore anybody to go read this book. It talks all about the American history, everything from pre-colonization to, I believe, the first half was up to the Civil War, and then after the Civil War, all the way up to George Bush Jr. and his presidency. But what I liked about the book is that it broke down all the different people who were involved with throughout American history. So all the Native Americans, all the Black Americans, and obviously all the European Americans. And it goes from colonization, and it teaches you what each of these different communities were going through all the way up through to modern history. So what I learned while I was studying that book, after doing all these different essays and having to do research and papers, and what I learned was that black people, like, we went through so much. There were so many people that bled and died. I mean, I even have family members myself that I learned about the different wars that went on, from the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, up to First, Second, World Wars, and how the impact that black people played in all these different movements that were going on. And so, we play a huge role in the history of this country, and the government was complicit in the oppression of black people. And so knowing that the definition, you can spin it however way you want to, but the definition of the N-word has always been a black slave, a black American slave. And when you think about it, back when there was the mid-Atlantic slave trade, where you had the United States trading different goods and grain and like corn and different livestock like horses, and they were trading with Europe, and then Europe would trade different grains, but also guns and industrialized goods, and they would trade back and forth between the Americas, but also with Africa, specifically the western coast of Africa, of the continent. And one of the main slave ports was Ghana. But right next to Ghana is Nigeria and Niger. And so all this talk about, oh man, it means, you are king. No, that's Ethiopia, which is on the east side, the east coast of the African continent, many countries away. The N-word has always been a term that was used for the slaves coming out of the west coast of Africa. And so it was just a term used, and it was a term that was used for hatred and used for dehumanization. And so it was something that was just adopted into this land from where the African slaves were coming from. And people, there's a narrative, obviously, that we've always heard, that these Europeans just ran up on the the land and took all the slaves, with their guns. But the truth is that this was a slave trade. This is a trade. They traded slaves from Africa to Europe, from Africa to America, and America traded livestock, and this was a real thing. And a lot of people don't want to think about it, but a lot of the slaves that were being sold were actually, war criminals or casualties, or prisoners of war. That's who was being traded. People who got captured, and you could see it now in Africa. No offense to Africans, I have no problem with Africans whatsoever, but we could see that even to this day, Africans fight amongst African nations fight against other African nations, and there's still genocide, things like that. So it's not hard to believe that there is there was people that would be captured and then sold off for money. This isn't hard to believe. So I digress, but my point is that here in this country, that word, the N-word, has been used to oppress and dehumanize the African American. And we somehow have taken that word, and I would implore anybody to also go read Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And if you go read that book, yeah, it's more than just a lot of people think of Uncle Tom and they don't even understand the context of the book. Never even actually read the book. You go read the book and you'll find out the whole book is about how these people operated back then, the slaves and slave owners, and how, it paints a picture for anybody. And you'll learn that there's different dialects when the different slaves will go into different areas. Because you follow Uncle Tom and you follow another young couple and you learn about the Quakers and things like that. But you'll learn that there's different dialects for the word. And so that's where it doesn't matter how someone says it. The fact is that the word still means the same thing. And you'd be naive to believe that it doesn't still mean that to this day. And so now we fast forward to modern day. And you start to wonder, how did the N-word become so popular? At what point was this the term that we wanted to aspire to be? And I just want you to think about that, because there was a time during the civil rights movement that black men were standing on the street holding up signs that said, "I am a man." They were being treated, even after slavery, they were being treated as animals, being treated with disrespect, being treated like they were less than human beings. And so we really have to be mindful. How did we get to this point? Well, I want you to think about it, because if we went from wanting to be respected in society and wanting to integrate into society, and then somewhere down the line, the being black became criminalized. But not only being criminalized, but we started to aspire to be criminalized and be criminals. And so something happened, probably around the 80s. Something happened where they took the coolest guys and they gave them a bunch of money. And then they told all the young boys that that's who they wanted to be. And you start thinking about some of the movies that started coming out just before the 80s, with the blaxploitation movies and the pimps and drugs and things like that were being put out in the media. And Superfly and Black Caesar and movies like this. Fast forward through the 80s, you start to hear rap music. And the rap music at the time was actually very upbeat, people partying, and they just came off of the backs of George Clinton and those guys. So the black culture is really around everybody having a good time, partying, and really just trying to talk about what they were going through and their impression in their own neighborhoods and things they were dealing with. And you'll remember that there were songs like Unity with Queen Latifah, and you think about self-destruction, we're headed for self-destruction, right? You start thinking about these songs that were coming out, they're very positive. And then a few different artists came out. And you think about NWA, think about Ice Cube, some of these really big artists that came out, and Ice-T, and these guys that came out, and major marketing dollars got pushed behind some of these artists. And the music was yes, it did highlight a lot of the injustices that were going on in those communities, but it also very much so pushed a very negative narrative around black culture. And that was around the late 80s and early 90s. And then you think about all the rest of the rap music that came out throughout the 90s, it was a lot of the positive rap started to fall away, and they weren't getting the money. But they were pumping who was pumping the money? They were pumping a lot of money into these artists that were criminals and that rapped about being criminals. They made it cool to be thugs, and they made it cool to be an N-word, right? So when I put all that together, I think about what was happening in the background. You had the war on drugs, right? But you also hear about stories of drugs being sold to black communities. You think about the actual real Rick Ross and the stories he tells about the CIA selling drugs into black communities. You think about the Clinton crime bill. You think about all these political things that were going on in the background while they were pushing this narrative. Why would they do something like that? Well, I hope anybody watching this goes and actually watches the 13th on Netflix that talks about the 13th Amendment that says that slavery is abolished except for punishment of a crime. And you'll see that the prison population since the 70s just would double over and double over. I think it was less than 200,000 by the year 1990. It was up to 1 million or around 1 million, and by the year 2000 that number had almost doubled to almost 2 million prisoners in the United States. And as you may know, almost half of those people were black. So, I remember Lil' Kim going to jail, and it was a badge of honor that these people would go through. Tupac, they would go to jail and then come out, and it was cool that they went in and didn't tell anybody, that nobody wanted to be snitches, and it was almost a badge of honor to be a real N-word. And you just wonder, how can a community be allowed to talk about killing people, talk about selling drugs, and talk about all this crime on the radio and in media, and nobody has a problem with this? But no other community is doing this. No other community is allowed to just rap about about killing people. And then I think about people like DaBaby, who literally got canceled for making one comment on stage about homosexuality. You say something like that, and you get taken off of all your endorsements. You get taken off of everything. All your music no longer plays. But it's okay as long as the baby raps about killing people. That's perfectly fine. He can rap about selling drugs and all the worst things in the world. And you think about the definition of, in our community, of a real N word. And it's all the bad stuff. And so we need to get out of this mind state of hyper-masculine, violent, misogynistic, and all these things that really capture and embody this very bottom of the caste system mentality, and get out of that. Like I said, I stopped saying the N-word a long time ago. And unfortunately, all the music that I love and grew up on, it's still pushing the narrative. And I still hear it. It's hard to not sing along and hear, the N-word. And it's tough. And so this is one of those things. I wanted to make a video. I wanted to make a comment about this because we always talk about the black community doing better and being better, and we don't get enough of this and that, and yet we celebrate the worst. It's really sad, but we need to come together on this, and somebody needs to say it. That's not right, and we need to stop. We have to stop using the word, and we have to stop perpetuating the image. We have to stop buying and playing music of people that perpetuate the image and perpetuate the negativity. And that starts with us. So this message, again, is for black people. If you are not black, you should not be using the N-word. But if you are black, you should not be using it either. But now you know why. And if you're smart, you'll pay attention to your surroundings and think about just how much everything that has influenced you in order to get you to feel like you need to be that. But I'm not going to call you that. Tap in, like, comment, share, subscribe. I appreciate you for tuning in